5-acre parcel currently in the central area.
Okay. This item has been kicking around for some time now, and I don't know why it's not advancing. There we go. Okay. We use the general plan when we review any rezones, and the general plan is kind of a guide for us. And I wanted to point out, you can see the list of 13 items on that left-hand side of the screen. Those are land use planning areas. And so we have 13 land use planning areas in our general plan, 2 of which we're going to be talking about tonight. As I looked through those planning areas, the majority of them all have very defined boundaries. For example, the Jordanelle planning area, it's the drainage. The Strawberry planning area is the drainage. The South Hills planning area that we'll be talking about tonight doesn't have a defined boundary between it and its neighboring planning area, which is the central planning area. If you also look at the Walsburg planning area, very defined boundaries. So as we look at the general plan and recommendations in the general plan, part of that is a concern of having the southern planning area move into the central planning area and start moving up to Highway 113 and into the North Fields, which obviously we don't want to have happen. And the Planning Commission, when they reviewed this item, they deliberated on it for probably a good hour, and it went back and forth. There were a lot of concerns over doing this. So just a quick timeline. The application was submitted in July of last year. It went to the Planning Commission for the rezone proposal on October 12th. The Planning Commission had a split vote of 3-2, 3 for, 2 against. And since there was not a quorum of 4, it got forwarded to the council with a no vote. October 18th, the council reviewed the rezone proposal, and there were 3 items that the council directed me to take care of. So they wanted to ensure that if a rezone is approved, that the property could be moved from the central to the southern planning area. They also wanted the attorneys to make a determination that we either do or don't have to renotice that and have the applicant apply for a general plan amendment. And the last one is that we were asked to look at somehow coming up with a physical boundary between the central planning area and the southern planning area. So on October 31st, the county attorney's office provided an opinion letter where they did say, no, you can't consider the general plan amendments under the rezone application. The applicant has to come in and apply for a general plan amendment, excuse me, which they did, and we advertised that. November 6th, the application for general plan amendment was submitted to the planning office, and we started processing that. December 14th, both the rezone and general plan amendment proposals were continued by the Planning Commission to allow staff to update the noticing language and send a courtesy notice to the property owners that might be moved out of the southern planning area. And then January 11th, both the rezone and general plan amendment proposals are presented to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission forwarded it to this body with a proposal to approve the amendments to the general plan, but again, it was a split vote. This time there were enough planning commissioners there to have a quorum, so it was a 4-2 vote. So this is the property in question. It is just west of Southfield Road. You can see Highway 113 here, Southfield Park, and Southfield Road right here. I'm sorry, Southfield Road right here. This is the new LDS church. This property right here, Zone RA5, Heber City boundary here. This is the bypass road alignment right here. So the existing land use area that the property is in the central planning area. The proposed land use area would be to move it to the southern planning area. And the intent behind moving it out of the central into the southern is the southern planning area does not have as many constraints on it as the central planning area. The central planning area is essentially the whole North Fields property. It talks about high groundwater. It talks about flood problems. It talks about not being able to provide services in the area. And it should remain in its historical land use patterns. The southern planning area would allow for 5-acre lots and septic drain fields. So this shows the boundary of the central planning area. This purple line here comes around and applicant's property here. This shows the southern area, southern planning area boundary here.
So is the south on all three, is the south on 3 sides of it?
2 sides.
2.
And our proposal tonight would be to take this piece, these pieces out of the southern planning area.
And put them into the central.
So the southern is on, of the applicant's property is on the east and the north?
East and north right now. And as I said, our proposal would be to make 650 South the boundary between the central and the southern
And
planning.
that's what we talked about. There seemed to be a natural break there, and topography, or land, water levels and everything.
Originally, it came down and took all of Castroville Road.
The central planning area?
And
We made the change.
about 8 or 9 years ago, we made the change there, to take Castroville Road off. Because all that properties was drier, and they were non-conforming lots.
So this is map 26 of our general plan, and it shows the flood hazard, earthquake hazards, and problem soils. And you can see that, and I wasn't here when these maps and the planning areas were created initially, but you can see that there's kind of a boundary line that follows this kind of a northeast pattern here. Applicant's property again is here.
Does anybody know why it was gerrymandered like that? Why it had that? Was there a geographic boundary at the time?
I think they were trying to follow some property lines, I think.
Oh, okay.
So it's not elevation, it's not floodplain, that's not basically.
Well, I think they tried to follow property lines, but generally follow that high groundwater boundary too, I think. This shows septic suitability, and this kind of avocado color is the generally unsuitable. So you can see that the bulk of the North Fields, again Highway 113 here, bulk of the North Fields and this portion of the southern planning area, well, central planning area and southern planning area down here is generally unsuitable. The brighter green is generally suitable. The brown is generally suitable but locally unsuitable, so there'd have to be individual tests to determine that. So again, was there any conscious decision to kind of follow a line there and say, here's the central and here's the southern? I don't know. This shows the bypass route. This property is west of that bypass route. This shows the inundation area if the dam were to break. So again, this is just a close-up of the property here. It's in the central planning area. Here is Spring Creek and the southern planning area boundary that goes around it that takes in these properties to the north of the property. Again, Heber City's boundary here. And the bypass road, you can see these property lines here in the middle. Here. So when we went to the county council, there was some guidance that we were directed to consider and see if there was any options we could come up with. And we looked at the maps, we looked at the ground, we looked at the depth to water from ground level. And what our proposal that we made to the Planning Commission was to establish a boundary of 650 south as the north boundary for the southern planning area, and to have the south border of the central planning area be 650 south.
So is that worded wrong? It should, that last sentence, should central planning area should extend no further south than 650 south.
That is worded wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So if you do approve the proposal that was forwarded from the Planning Commission, in essence, these properties would be taken out of the southern planning area and put into the central planning area, and we've sent the courtesy notices to them. The zoning would stay the same. I think this is an RA5 piece, this is an A20 piece. And that boundary would now be 650 south coming to the west side of that property and back. These properties would remain the same they are now. If any of these wanted to be into the southern planning area, then obviously this code amendment would allow them to, be in the southern planning area. This code amendment would allow them to do that as long as they were east of that Spring Creek now.
And south of 650.
South of 650.
That's kind of the natural boundary we asked for, correct?
So the findings are that the county council's land use authority has very broad discretion on general plan, map amendments, and rezones, as you're aware. A big concern by the Planning Commission was approving the amendment could allow the possibility of expansion of the RA5 zoning throughout the Southfields area up to 650 south and possibly encroach into the North Fields. The common boundary between the central and southern planning area appears to be defined by shallow groundwater and septic suitability as illustrated in those maps that I just showed you, 26 and 27 in the general plan. Regarding the constraints in map 26 and 27, there appears to be less impacted property south of 650 south than north of 650 south.
Impacted meaning what?
Impacted meaning high groundwater, meaning septic suitability. If a recommendation is made to move the applicant's property boundary from the central planning area to the southern planning area, the voting body should make a finding that elaborates what characteristics and/or constraints are present or not present in regards to the property and the planning area, making the southern planning area a more appropriate area than the central planning area. The applicant would need to pursue a rezone in order to change the zoning from A20 to RA5. This general plan amendment, if approved, would not rezone the property. So that's the next item on the agenda. And the possible recommendations would be that if there is a desire to include the applicant's property in the southern planning area, along with the requested general plan map amendment for the applicant's property, there should be an amendment to the text in the land use element of the southern planning area of the general plan, recommending that the boundary for the southern planning area not be extended any farther north than 650 south or any farther west than Spring Creek stream channel. The general plan language should also state that the findings for doing this is the fewer constraints on the south side of 650 south. The land use element of the central planning area should also be amended to say that the central planning area should not extend further, that should be south again, than 650 south, and state the findings for doing this. So in the future, if someone came in, and I agree that this is a slippery slope, we obviously want to maintain the central planning area. If someone were to come in and want to move that boundary, then they'd have to amend both the central planning area text language and map and the southern planning area text language and map. And hopefully we've got enough information to say, here's why we drew the line there, These are the differences between north of 650 South and south of 650 South. Number two, if approved, an ordinance would need to come back to the council with specific language as outlined above. I do not have an ordinance written, and I didn't want to be presumptive that you were going to approve this. Number three, any parcels north of 650 South that are in the southern planning area should be moved into the central planning area. This appears to only impact 2 parcels in the county, would help ensure there is a green belt separation between Midway and Heber City, along with maintaining the rural character along SR 113. It would also limit the number of driveway entrances, roads accessing SR 113, which should have as few interruptions as possible. So just some conceptual ordinance language that if you decided to move forward with this, that would come back to you in ordinance form. But basically it would just say that the southern planning area boundary is limited to south of 650 South and the Spring Creek Channel. This is due to the constraints identified in maps 26 and 27 of the general plan. And I would be working with the attorney's office to come up with as many things that we could add to that to define the reasons why. And then the other bullet statement on the right, the central planning area boundary should not encroach further north than 650 South. But this is I was just backwards on all that. This is due to the constraints identified in maps 26 and 27 of the general plan, as well as other issues identified in the central planning area of the general plan. There's language throughout the general plan and the central planning area that says that there should be a green belt open space separation between Heber and Midway, and even more language than that. So all those things I think would contribute to being able to maintain that boundary.
Well, and like the groundwater and so forth kind of enforces that.
Yeah. So here's the motion by the Planning Commission. Commissioner King made a motion to recommend denial of the amendment to the general plan and keep the general plan as it is now. The reason are the constraints of the central planning area and the septic drain fields and potential contamination of groundwater. Seconded by Commissioner Cook. And it died because there was no majority vote for it. Then there was another vote by Commissioner Smith, who made a recommendation to approve the proposal and move the boundary to 650 South and Spring Creek with all the findings and recommendations in the staff report. And it passed with a 4-2 vote. I think.
And Zurcher,
he wasn't there.
okay.
2 of our council members were there, and I think the big debate was, if the property is rezoned to RA5, then it's less likely to be either annexed into Heber City, and once it's developed, then hopefully that kind of sets that boundary. Plus you've got the bypass to the east of you. So, any questions for me?
Now, can you go back to map 26? That pretty well measures or identifies the high water tables.
That's a very high level map saying at a 30,000 foot level, here's where the high water tables are, generally.
But it's probably pretty close.
Yeah, and these were done in probably 2000, 2001, 99, 2000.
Because I did some checking on this parcel, and for the Farmland Assessment Act, the state came in and had the soil conservation come in and classify all this property. This property is classified as Class 3 irrigated property, which is capable of producing so many tons of the acre. You get further north, the stuff in the high water table is your meadow type grass properties. The M4, M3, or you've grazed 1 or 2 that's too wet to crop. So this property we're talking about tonight is treated just like a parcel up in Center Creek or Lake Creek. It's irrigated property, it don't have the high water table. The soil conservation, when they classified it, didn't recognize the high water table in that area.
Did you notice that changed on the other side of 650?
It did, but it went a little further north than 650.
Okay, anything further for Doug or any more comments or questions before we go to the applicant public hearing? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Anything from the applicant? Mr. Probst, anything to add or?
Just if you have questions.
Okay. We'll now open up this item for public hearing. If you're interested in making public comment, please come up and state your name for the record and speak into the microphone so we can get you on the record.
Dave Kenner, I'm a county resident and a pest generally.
Nonsense on the pest part.
I don't have any real skin in this game. However, I make a point. When the council voted to rezone North Fields, I joined the group that collected signatures. And I'm not a native of the valley. What surprised me, though, was it was the natives of the valley who were most opposed to that. I collected a little over 400 signatures, and as you know, we had it successfully placed on the ballot. And what did surprise me was that when the vote was taken, it was 3-1 in opposition to that action. Now, I don't know how applicable that is specific to this situation, but I would say that if it is quite similar, then I would say that one option that you might consider, well, if you don't decide to just reject it, and not sure you want to accept it, I think you yourself would have the authority to place it on the ballot and let the voters have their say come November. My only other comment is that a few years ago there was a study that was used when this Walmart project was coming to town about how the residents wanted to protect the rural environment. And if you look in any direction from the center of Heber City, in some places it looks like public housing or housing project in China with the high rises stacked right next to each other. And that too was part of the commentary of the lifelong residents, of the crowding of homes on top of each other and so on. Going from RA20 to RA5 isn't going to be a big deal. That gets to one final question I have is, could you grant them to move out of the central to the southern and not change the density? And would that change the applicant's view of the proposition? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kenner.
Wayne Hardman. Just in reference to the comment on the annexation plan of Heber annexing that property, we're just going through our annexation plan and are about to adopt it. And one of the statements in our plan is not to adopt anything past the bypass road. We want to keep a corridor, an open space corridor between Heber City and Midway. So that's what this property, I don't think, will be in jeopardy of being annexed.
Any further public comment?
Hello, my name is Heather Whitney, and we moved here, well, we've owned a property here for about 4 or 5 years in Midway. We're originally from California, and we moved here full-time in December. And we started coming here about 9 years ago. And so we've seen a lot of changes even during that period of time. We love this town, and I guess one of the things that concerns me is how much potential land is at stake, and can people drain the water away themselves? I've seen that in some other areas when we've been looking around at land, even in Midway, where you can use somewhat artificial means or diversions to remove some of the water, and then so if there aren't rules around that, and people can go in a man-made manner and create the ability to meet the criteria that are set forth, then we can potentially have a lot more development. And it does seem to set quite a precedent, even though there are some special attributes, and you look at the zigzagging here, I'm sure there's going to be more and more pressure for people to want to do this kind of thing. So I worry about that. I think a lot of what brought us, our family here, and many other families that I've talked to, is the open spaces, the beauty of this idyllic place, and I'm very concerned about what this place is going to become without some major oversight of looking at the bigger picture and ramifications of letting one property move forward in this way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Megan Hooley. I live on 1200 South in the Southfields, and my husband's really been, this has been quite an issue to him, and he's out of town, so he has written a statement. He sent it to us in email, but I'm just going to read it just in case you have not checked your email. Wasatch County Council. Dear council members, I'm writing to you as a concerned community member that wants to save the historical fields of the Heber Valley. I believe that Megan Propp's request to modify the central and southern planning districts to meet their A20 to A5 rezoning needs threatens the historical fields and the overall quality of life of the Southfields and the Northfields community. As a directly impacted resident, I'm very opposed to any modification of the central or southern planning districts, especially just to meet the needs of one landowner while overlooking the greater good of the community. The protection of the